It started with a message that wasn't supposed to mean anything. At least that's what I told myself. Nice shirt today. That's it. That was the first message Grant ever sent me. No context, no explanation. Just that. Popped up on my phone while I was halfway through a boring lecture. And I remember staring at it longer than I should have. Because here's the thing, I hadn't given him my number. Not directly. We'd been in the same class for a few weeks, exchanging the occasional glance, the kind that lingers just a second too long before you look away and pretend it meant nothing. Grant was noticeable. Not in an obvious, loud way. More like the kind of guy you don't realize you've been watching until you catch yourself doing it. Tall, calm, always sitting a few rows back. The type who didn't try too hard, but somehow still stood out. I had no idea how he got my number, but I did know exactly who it was. I typed back before I could overthink it. Thanks. You stalking me or something? There was a pause, just long enough to make me regret answering at all. Then, only a little. I shouldn't have smiled, but I did. That should have been it. A random, slightly weird interaction. Something to laugh off, maybe mention to a friend later. But Grant didn't stop. That was the problem. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming. Always casual. Always just on the edge of something more. Skipped class today. You made it boring without you. You always sit by the window, or is that just your thing? You look different when you're focused. Didn't expect that. Each message felt intentional. Like he was paying attention in a way most people don't. Not just noticing me but studying me. And yeah, I could have shut it down. Blocked him. Ignored him. Asked him straight up what he wanted. But I didn't. Because if I'm being honest, part of me liked it. More than I should have. We didn't really talk in person at first. That was the weird part. In class, everything stayed normal. He'd sit in his usual spot. Relaxed. Unreadable. Like nothing was happening. Sometimes our eyes would meet, and there'd be this flicker of recognition, like a private conversation running underneath everything else. But neither of us said anything out loud. Not until one afternoon. I was packing up my stuff, half distracted, already thinking about grabbing coffee before heading home. The classroom had mostly emptied out when I felt it, someone stopping just a little too close behind me. You type faster than I expected. I froze. His voice was lower than I imagined. Calm, steady. Too close. I turned, trying to play it cool, but my brain was already scrambling to catch up. Grant stood there like he'd always been there. Hands in his pockets, expression neutral, but his eyes were different up close. Sharper. More focused. You're watching me type now? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Sometimes. There was a beat. A quiet one. And for some reason, neither of us moved. Up close, he was distracting. Not in an over-the-top way. Just enough to throw me off balance. Like I couldn't fully read him, and that made everything feel a little less predictable. You always this subtle? I added. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. Barely there. Depends who I'm talking to. That shouldn't have landed the way it did. But it did. After that, things shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough. We started talking more. Still casual, still easy. But there was something under it now. Something neither of us was saying directly. Grant had this way of pushing just far enough without crossing a line. You ever notice how you avoid eye contact when you're thinking too much? I don't. You're doing it right now. Stuff like that. Should have annoyed me. Instead, it made me more aware of him. Of everything. One night, I was lying in bed, scrolling aimlessly, when his name popped up again. You up? Simple. Too simple. Yeah. Why? There was a longer pause this time. I almost thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just thinking about something. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. About what? Another pause. Long enough to feel intentional. About you. That should have been the moment I shut it down. Seriously. Any normal person would have taken that as a sign to step back, maybe laugh it off, maybe call him out. But instead, I felt my chest tighten in a way I didn't quite understand. What about me? I typed. This time, the reply came faster. Trying to figure out if you know what you're doing. I frowned slightly. What does that even mean? There was a typing bubble. It disappeared. Came back. Then finally. You give mixed signals, Caleb. My heart skipped. I read that message 3 times. Because the thing is, I hadn't been trying to send any signals. At least not consciously. But now that he said it, I couldn't stop thinking about every glance, every reply, every moment I'd let things linger just a little longer than necessary. Maybe you're reading into it, I wrote. Maybe, he replied. Another pause. Then, or maybe you just don't want to admit it. I exhaled slowly, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just casual anymore. And the worst part? I didn't want it to be. I didn't realize how far things had already gone. Until the next day, because when I walked into class, Grant wasn't in his usual seat. He was sitting next to mine, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when I hesitated for just a second, he looked up at me and said, "Took you long enough," like this had been inevitable all along. And somehow, I believed him. I should have sat somewhere else. That was my first thought when I saw him there right next to my usual seat, like he'd been waiting for me. But instead, I just stood there for a second too long, gripping the strap of my bag, pretending I was deciding something. Grant glanced up, calm as ever. "Took you long enough," like this wasn't weird, like this wasn't new, like this had always been the plan. I let out a quiet breath and slid into the seat next to him. "Didn't know I had assigned seating now," I muttered. "You don't," he said easily. A pause. "Unless you want it." I shot him a look, but he was already facing forward, like he hadn't just said that, like he wasn't constantly doing this, dropping something that lingered just long enough to mess with my head. The lecture started, but I barely registered any of it. Not with him sitting that close. It was different now. Before, there had always been distance, space, enough room to pretend nothing was happening. Now, I could feel him, not touching, not even close to it, but aware. Every small movement felt amplified. The way his arm rested on the desk, the way he leaned back slightly in his chair, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. And the worst part? I was hyper-aware of myself too, of how I was sitting, where I was looking, whether I seemed normal or completely thrown off. "You're doing it again," he said quietly. I turned slightly. "Doing what?" "Avoiding. I'm literally sitting next to you." "That's not what I meant." His voice was low, just enough for me to hear. No one else would have noticed. I frowned, but I didn't push it, because I knew exactly what he meant. About halfway through class, I felt it. His gaze. I didn't even need to look to know he was watching me. And for some reason, I didn't look away immediately. I kept my eyes on my notes, pretending to focus, even though my thoughts were completely elsewhere. "What?" I muttered under my breath. "You always do that," he said. "Do what?" "Act like you don't notice." I finally turned to him. Big mistake. Because he was already looking at me. Not casually. Not like before. This was different. More direct. "You're imagining things," I said, quieter now. "Am I?" His expression didn't change. But there was something in his eyes, something steady. Like he wasn't guessing anymore. Like he was sure. And that made my chest tighten. After class, I expected him to leave. Go back to whatever normal routine he had before all this started. But instead, he stood up when I did. Fell into step beside me like it was natural. Like we always walked out together. "You always go this way?" he asked. "Yeah." "Good." I glanced at him. "Good." He shrugged. "Means I don't have to pretend I'm just coincidentally heading the same direction." I let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "At least you're honest about it." Usually, that word stuck with me longer than it should have. We walked in silence for a bit. Not awkward, just quiet. But it wasn't the kind of silence you ignore. It was the kind that feels full, like something's building underneath it. "You never asked how I got your number," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "I figured you wouldn't tell me." "I would've." "Okay," I said, raising an eyebrow. "How'd you get it?" He glanced ahead, hands in his pockets. "Group chat." "That's it. That's it." I stared at him for a second. You're telling me you went through a class group chat, found my number, and just decided to text me out of nowhere? Yeah. No hesitation. No apology. Just, yeah. That's kind of insane. Is it? Yes. He nodded slightly like he was considering that. Didn't stop you from replying. That hit a little too directly. I didn't have a response for that. We reached the corner where we'd usually split off. I slowed down slightly, expecting him to keep going. He didn't. He stopped with me. You heading home? He asked. Yeah. Another pause. Then, walk you. I blinked. You don't even know where I live. I can find out. I huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Still standing here, though. He wasn't wrong. And that was the problem. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe because it already felt like we were past the point of pretending this was normal. Maybe because part of me wanted to see how far he'd actually go. Or maybe I just didn't want to be the one to stop it. Either way, we kept walking, side by side. By the time we reached my building, my thoughts were a mess. Nothing about this felt casual anymore. Not the messages. Not the way he looked at me. Not the fact that he'd just walked me all the way home like it was nothing. I turned to him, exhaling slowly. Well, this is me. Grant looked up at the building, then back at me. Yeah, figured. There was that same calm expression again, like he was always one step ahead. Thanks for the walk, I said. Anytime. Neither of us moved. That same pause again. The kind that stretches just enough to become something else. You gonna say it? He asked. I frowned slightly. Say what? What you're thinking. I hesitated. Because the truth was, I didn't even fully know what I was thinking. Just that something had shifted. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. You're a lot, I said finally. His mouth curved slightly. Yeah. That doesn't bother you? No. Why not? He looked at me for a second. Really looked this time. Because I don't want it to. My breath caught slightly. That answer felt too real. Too direct. And suddenly, everything about this felt closer than it should have been. I should have ended it there. Said goodbye. Gone inside. Taken a step back before things got more complicated. But instead, I stayed. And so did he. And neither of us pretended this was just casual anymore. I don't know who moved first. That's the part that stuck with me later, how neither of us could really claim it. We were just standing there a little too close, the space between us feeling smaller than it should have been. And then somehow, it got even smaller. You're quiet, Grant said. His voice wasn't teasing this time. It was lower, more careful. I'm thinking, I replied. Dangerous. I exhaled, shaking my head slightly. Yeah, well, you don't exactly make it easy. That earned me a small reaction. Not a full smile, he didn't really do those, but something shifted in his expression. Good, he said. I blinked. Good. Means you're paying attention. I let out a short laugh, but it didn't fully land. Because I was paying attention. To everything. The way he was standing just a little closer now. The way his eyes didn't leave mine. Like he wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The way the air between us felt a heavier. You always this intense? I asked. Only when it matters. That did something to me. I didn't like how easily his words were getting under my skin. Or maybe I did. That was the problem. There was a moment quiet, stretched thin where it felt like something was about to happen. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just inevitable. And I think we both felt it. Because neither of us stepped back. You still think I'm reading into it? Grant asked. My throat felt dry all of a sudden. I think, I started, then stopped. Because what was I supposed to say? That I didn't know what this was anymore? That I hadn't planned for any of it, but somehow still kept letting it happen? That you're not exactly subtle, I finished instead. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. Then back up. Never said I was. My chest tightened. That was new. That wasn't just hints anymore. You could have ignored me, he said after a second. I frowned slightly. What? The messages. Oh. I looked away for a moment, toward the entrance of my building, then back at him. Yeah, I could've. But you didn't. It wasn't a question. And I didn't answer right away. Because again, he wasn't wrong. I didn't think it would turn into this, I admitted. This, he repeated. His tone made it sound like he was testing the word. Yeah, I said quietly. A beat. And what is this? I let out a breath, running a hand through my hair. I don't know, Grant. That's kind of the point. For the first time since I'd met him, he seemed to hesitate. Just slightly. But I noticed. Does it bother you? He asked. The question caught me off guard. Does what bother me? This? He said again, gesturing vaguely between us. I hesitated, because the honest answer wasn't simple. It should, I said. But it doesn't. There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. I shook my head slowly. No, I admitted, and saying it out loud made it feel more real than anything else had so far. Another pause. Closer now. Too close to pretend it didn't mean something. You're not as hard to read as you think, Grant said. I huffed quietly. You keep saying that. Because it's true. And what exactly am I thinking right now? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes held mine for a second longer than usual. Then, that you don't want me to leave. My breath caught. That was too accurate. Way too accurate. You don't get to just decide that, I said. But my voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be. I'm not deciding, he said calmly. I'm noticing. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loud in a different way. Like everything we hadn't said was suddenly right there between us. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt it clearly. That line. The one we'd been circling around. The one neither of us had crossed. Yet, you should go, I said. The words came out softer than I expected. Not like a dismissal. More like a warning. Grant didn't move. Do you want me to? He asked. I swallowed. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not what I should want, but what I actually wanted. And right now, those two things weren't the same. I don't know, I admitted. That seemed to be enough for him. Because instead of stepping back, he leaned in slightly, not enough to touch, just enough to make my pulse spike. Then figure it out, he said quietly. I should have stepped back. I should have created distance, reset whatever this was before it got even more complicated. But instead, I stayed exactly where I was. And so did he. And for a second, just a second, I forgot why that might be a bad idea. I don't know how long we stood like that. Seconds, probably. But it felt longer. Long enough for my brain to catch up and start throwing up all the reasons why this was a bad idea. And just as quickly ignore them. Caleb, Grant said quietly. Not pushing. Not rushing. Just saying my name like he already knew I wasn't walking away. That alone was enough to mess with my head. Yeah, I answered, barely above a whisper. You're still here. I let out a shaky breath. So are you. A pause. Then softer. I would have left if you wanted me to. That hit harder than anything else he'd said so far. Because it meant this wasn't just him pushing. It was both of us. And I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. You're making this complicated, I said. I'm not doing anything, he replied. That's not true. It is. I frowned slightly. I stopped myself. Been what? He asked. I hesitated, because saying it out loud would make it real. You know. His mouth twitched faintly. Say it. I shook my head. No. Why not? Because I exhaled. You'll just twist it. I don't twist things, he said calmly. You do. I point things out. That's worse. That actually got a small reaction out of him, a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Maybe, he said. The air felt heavier now. Closer. Like every second we stood there was pulling us further into something neither of us had planned. You keep answering me, he said. I blinked. What? My messages. You keep replying. That doesn't mean. It means something. His voice was steady. Not aggressive. Not demanding. Just certain. And that certainty was starting to get to me. You don't even know what I mean by it, I said. I do. Oh yeah. I crossed my arms slightly, trying to ground myself. What do I mean, then? He took a step closer. Just one. But it was enough. Same thing I do. My breath caught again. God. I was getting tired of that happening. You don't get to decide that, I said. But there was no real bite to it. I'm not deciding, he repeated. Then what are you doing? Waiting. That threw me off. For what? His eyes stayed on mine. For you to stop pretending you don't feel it. That landed. Hard. Because I did feel it. I just hadn't said it. Hadn't even fully admitted it to myself. Until now. Grant. I started. But I didn't even know what I was going to say. Stop. Slow down. Don't. None of those felt right. Because none of them were true. You don't have to say anything, he said quietly. And somehow, that made it worse. Because now there was nothing to hide behind. No words to deflect with. Just this. Whatever this was. He moved again. Closer. Close enough now that I could feel the heat from him. Close enough that it would have been obvious to anyone walking by that this wasn't just two guys talking outside a building. And still, I didn't step back. Last chance, he said softly. My brows pulled together. For what? To tell me to leave. I swallowed. Because I knew that if I didn't say it now, things were going to cross that line we'd been dancing around. And there'd be no pretending after that. No, I said. Came out before I could stop it. Quiet, but clear. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Not relief. Just confirmation. Like he'd been expecting that answer all along. Okay, he said. And then, he closed the distance. It wasn't rushed. Not sudden. If anything, it was slow enough to give me time to pull away. To stop it. To change my mind. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was. And when his hand came up hesitant for the first time since I'd met him, I felt it. That small break in his confidence. That moment where he wasn't sure. And for some reason, that's what made me move. Not away. Closer. The contact was light at first. Barely anything. Just enough to make everything in my chest tighten all at once. It wasn't like I imagined it would be. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was quiet, careful, like we were both trying to figure it out at the same time. And somehow that made it hit even harder. When we pulled back, it wasn't far. Just enough to breathe. Just enough to look at each other again. And yeah, everything had changed. There was no going back to casual messages now. No pretending this was just jokes or hints or maybe. Still think I'm reading into it? Grant asked quietly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. No, I admitted. My voice felt different. Everything felt different. There was a beat of silence. Then, this doesn't have to be a big thing, he said. I blinked. What? He shrugged slightly, but his eyes didn't leave mine. We don't have to overcomplicate it. I frowned. You mean after everything you just… I mean, he cut in, calm as ever. We take it one step at a time. That should have reassured me. But instead, it made my chest tighten in a different way. Because suddenly I realized, this wasn't just a moment. It wasn't just tension or curiosity anymore. This was going somewhere. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop either. I barely slept that night. Not because anything dramatic happened after that, but because of how quiet everything felt. Too quiet. Like my brain was trying to catch up with something my body had already decided. I kept replaying it. The way he'd looked at me. The way he waited. The fact that he gave me an out and I didn't take it. That part stuck the most. Because it meant this wasn't something that just happened. I chose it. The next morning, I almost didn't go to class. Not in a dramatic, I can't face him way. More like, I didn't know what version of this we were supposed to be now. Were we pretending it didn't happen? Were we picking up right where we left off? Were we… something? That last thought made my chest tighten. So I shoved it aside and grabbed my stuff. No overthinking. Just go. He was already there. Of course he was. Same seat. Same relaxed posture. Same unreadable expression. Like nothing had changed. Except it had. And I felt it immediately. The second I walked in, his eyes found mine. Not subtly, not like before. Direct, steady, like we weren't pretending anymore. "You're late," he said as I sat down. "I'm not. You are by 2 minutes." I glanced at him. "You keeping track now?" "Sometimes." That same tone again. Casual, but not really. For a few minutes we just sat there. No messages. No side comments. Just being in the same space. And somehow that felt more intense than anything before. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, maybe a little too quickly. "Yeah." He didn't respond right away. Just watched me for a second. "You're thinking too much again." I exhaled through my nose. "You don't miss anything, do you?" "Not when it comes to you." That shouldn't have hit as hard as it did. But it did. "Grant," I said under my breath, keeping my eyes forward. "What are we doing?" There it was. Out loud. Finally. He didn't answer immediately. And for once, that made him feel less in control. "I told you," he said after a second. "We don't have to define it." "That's easy for you to say." "Why?" I turned to him slightly. "Because you act like you've already figured it out." He held my gaze. "Maybe I have." My jaw tightened a little. "Then what is it?" Another pause. But this one felt different. More careful. "Something I don't want to mess up," he said. That wasn't what I expected. At all. It threw me off just enough that I didn't have a response ready. And he noticed. Of course he did. "You thought I was just playing around," he added. I frowned. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." There was no accusation in his voice. Just honesty. And that made it worse somehow. "I don't know what you want from me," I admitted. The words felt heavier than I expected. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "That's not true." "What am I asking for then?" I hesitated. Because the answer wasn't something he said out loud. It was everything underneath. "This," I said quietly. He leaned back slightly, studying me. "And you don't want it?" That question hit different. Because now it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because the answer was there. Clear. Simple. And way harder to say than it should have been. "I didn't say that," I repeated. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." The rest of the class blurred together. I couldn't focus. Not with everything sitting between us like that. Unspoken but obvious. And somehow heavier than before. When it ended, I packed my stuff slower than usual. Not really thinking about it. Just delaying. He noticed that too. "Walk you again?" he asked. Like it was normal now. Like this was already part of the routine. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew what it meant if I said yes. It wasn't just a walk anymore. "Yeah," I said anyway, because apparently I was still making the same choice. Over and over again. This time, the walk felt different. Quieter. Less teasing. Less back and forth. But somehow more real. Our hands brushed once. Accidentally. Or maybe not. Neither of us pulled away immediately. "You're doing that thing again," he said. I glanced at him. "What thing?" "Overthinking." I huffed. "Maybe you should stop giving me reasons to." "Not gonna happen." That earned a small smile from me. Against my will. When we reached my building again, it felt familiar. Like déjà vu. Same spot. Same pause. But not the same feeling. Because now we both knew exactly what this was. "You still think this is a bad idea?" he asked. I looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he stood there like he wasn't going anywhere unless I said so. At the way he waited. Again. Always giving me the choice. And somehow making it harder every time. "I think," I started slowly, then shook my head. "I think I stopped trying to convince myself it is." Something shifted in his expression again. Subtle. But there. "Good," he said quietly. And this time, when the silence settled between us, it didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt like the beginning of something we were both already in. Whether we admitted it or not. I stopped pretending after that. Not out loud. Not in some big, dramatic way. But internally, something shifted. Before, everything with Grant had this layer of denial wrapped around it. Like I could always tell myself it wasn't real, or it wasn't going anywhere, or it didn't mean anything. Now, that was gone. And honestly, that scared me a little. The messages didn't stop. If anything, they got easier, less careful. Not in a reckless way, but like we'd both stopped filtering as much. You're quiet today. Thinking again? Or avoiding me in a different way? I rolled my eyes when I read that last one. I'm literally sitting 2 rows in front of you. Yeah, he replied. Still counts. I shouldn't have smiled, but I did. It wasn't just the messages, though. It was everything else. The way he'd look at me like we had some kind of inside understanding now. The way he didn't hesitate to sit next to me anymore. The way silence between us didn't feel awkward, it felt loaded, like something was always there, just under the surface. A few days later, it escalated again. Not in some huge way, just naturally, which somehow made it worse. You busy tonight? He asked after class. Straightforward. No hint. No build-up. Just that. I glanced at him, caught off guard by how normal he sounded. Depends, I said. Why? He shrugged slightly. Thought we could hang out. Hang out. Like this was just that simple, easy, normal. You mean like outside of class? I asked. Yeah. That shouldn't have felt like such a big step. But it did. Because up until now, everything existed in this controlled space. Class, messages, short walks, contained, safe. This was different. I hesitated. Of course I did. And of course he noticed. You can say no, he said. Same tone as always. Calm, unpressured, giving me an out. Again. I didn't say no, I replied. Not yet. There was a small pause. Then, okay. I don't know why that felt like a decision, but it did. Where? I asked. Your place, he said. Too fast. Too sure. I blinked. You've already decided that? You didn't suggest anything else. That's because I didn't even say yes yet. He tilted his head slightly. But you were going to. God, that confidence. I let out a breath, shaking my head. You're impossible. And yet, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Fine, I said. The word came out before I could overthink it. Tonight. Something in his expression shifted. Not smug, just satisfied, like he'd been waiting for that exact answer. Text me when you're home, he said. I know where you live. Remember. Still. That still stayed with me the rest of the day. By the time I got back to my apartment, my thoughts were already spiraling. This wasn't just texting anymore. This wasn't just walking me home. This was him coming over, being in my space. No distractions. No buffer. Just us. I stood in the middle of my room for a solid minute before doing anything. Looking around like something was going to magically change. Like the space would somehow feel different now. Didn't, but I did. When my phone buzzed, my chest tightened slightly. Home. Of course. I stared at the message, then typed back. Yeah. 3 dots appeared instantly. On my way. That was it. No build-up. No extra words. Just happening. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. Okay. I muttered to myself. Okay. Like saying it out loud would make me feel more in control. Didn't. By the time the knock came, my heart was beating way faster than it should have been. Which was ridiculous. Because this wasn't some random situation. This was Grant. The same guy who'd been slowly, steadily working his way into my head for weeks. And now he was here. I opened the door. And yeah, that same feeling hit instantly. Like everything outside disappeared for a second. Like the space between us already knew what this was. Hey, he said. Simple. Like always. Hey, I replied. Not simple at all. There was a brief pause. Then he stepped inside. Like it was natural. Like he'd done it 100 times before. I closed the door behind him. And just like that, there was no distance left to hide behind anymore. The silence hit first. Not awkward. Not empty. Just there. Grant didn't rush in. Didn't start talking. Didn't try to fill it. He just stood in my space like he belonged there. And somehow, that felt more intense than anything he'd done before. "You always this quiet?" he asked. I leaned back slightly against the counter, crossing my arms. "Only when I'm trying not to overthink." He nodded once. "Not working." I let out a quiet breath. "No, not really." He moved around the apartment slowly. Not snooping, just taking it in. Like he was trying to understand something about me without asking. "That where you sit all night?" he asked, nodding toward the couch. "Sometimes." "Explains a lot." I frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" He glanced at me. "You think too much when you're still." That shouldn't have made sense. But it did. "You don't?" I asked. "Not like you." "Then how?" He shrugged. "I notice. Then I act." I huffed softly. "Yeah, I've noticed that." That earned me a small look. The kind that lingered. Another pause. But this one felt different. Closer. Like the distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. "You nervous?" he asked. Straight to it. "Of course." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "A little." "Why?" I looked at him. "Seriously." He held my gaze. "Yeah." I hesitated, because saying it out loud felt exposing. But at this point, pretending wasn't really an option anymore. "Because this isn't just texting anymore," I said. His expression didn't change. "Okay. That's it." I asked. "Okay. What do you want me to say?" "I don't know," I muttered. "Something." He took a step closer. Slow. Measured. "You want me to say I'm not thinking about it?" he asked quietly. That shifted something in my chest. "Are you?" "No." That honesty again. Direct. No hesitation. "I just don't see the point in overcomplicating it," he continued. "That's easy for you," I said. "Why?" "Because you don't look like you're about to overthink every possible outcome." He tilted his head slightly. "Does it change anything if you do?" I opened my mouth, then stopped, because the answer was obvious. "No," I admitted. "Then stop," he said simply. I let out a quiet laugh. "Wow, wish it worked like that." "It can." I shook my head. "No, it really can't." He stepped closer again. Now we were back in that space. That same distance as before. The one that didn't leave much room for pretending. "You're doing it again," he said. "Yeah," I replied softly. "I know." This time, I didn't try to hide it. There was a shift. Subtle, but clear. Because instead of calling it out, he reached for me, slow enough to stop, close enough that I could feel it coming. And this time, I didn't freeze. It wasn't like outside. Not hesitant. Not testing. Felt more certain. Like whatever line we crossed before. We both knew exactly where it was now. My hand caught his wrist for a second. Not to stop him. Just instinct. He paused. Looked at me. And for the first time, there was a question there. Not confidence. Not assumption. A question. "You sure?" he asked. Quiet. Real. That hit deeper than anything else. Because now, it wasn't just happening. Now I had to choose it again. I looked at him. At the way he actually waited this time. At the fact that he wasn't pushing. And somehow, that made it easier. Not harder. "Yeah," I said. And this time, I didn't hesitate. The distance disappeared. Completely. And everything that had been building for weeks. All the looks, the messages, the tension. It all finally had somewhere to go. It wasn't rushed. But it wasn't careful either. It was real. Messy in the way real things are. Not perfect. Not planned. Just happening. At some point, I forgot what I was overthinking about. Forgot what I was supposed to be worried about. Because none of that felt relevant anymore. Not with him this close. Not with everything finally out in the open. When we pulled back this time, it wasn't because we had to. It was because we needed to breathe. Neither of us spoke right away. And for once, there was nothing left to figure out. Still think this is a bad idea? He asked quietly. I shook my head, breathing still uneven. No, and this time, I actually meant it. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. Just a little. Good, he said. And yeah, at that point I knew. This wasn't just something that started with hints anymore. It was something we were already in, and neither of us was stopping. It didn't feel like a single moment anymore. That was the biggest difference. Before, everything with Grant had been split into pieces, messages, looks, pauses, almost. Now, it all blurred together. We didn't rush anything after that, which I didn't expect. I thought once we crossed that line, everything would speed up, get messy, complicated. But instead, it slowed down. In a good way. We ended up on the couch at some point, not talking much, just existing in the same space without pretending it didn't mean anything anymore. That alone felt new. You're quiet again, Grant said. I glanced at him. I think I ran out of things to overthink. That's new. Don't get used to it. That got a small reaction out of him. Not a full smile, but close enough. There was a pause. Comfortable this time. Not heavy. Not tense. Just calm. This what you expected? He asked after a while. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? This, he said, glancing around, then back at me. Us. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. No, I admitted. Too much. I shook my head. No, just different. How? I thought about it for a second. Because it was different. Not just the obvious part. Everything felt more grounded than I expected. I thought it would feel more complicated, I said. And it doesn't. He watched me for a second, like he was trying to decide if I actually meant that. You sure? He asked. Yeah, I said. Then, after a beat, I think I made it more complicated in my head than it actually is. That tracks. I nudged him lightly with my shoulder. Shut up. Another quiet moment. But this one felt settled. Like we weren't building towards something anymore. We were already there. So what now? I asked. That question felt different than before. Less anxious. More real. Grant didn't answer right away. He leaned back slightly, thinking. Then, we keep going. That's it. That's it. I raised an eyebrow. You don't want to define it? Label it? Overanalyze it like a normal person? No. Why not? He looked at me. Because I don't need to. That should have frustrated me. But it didn't. Because for once, I understood what he meant. You always this sure about things? I asked. Not everything. Just this. Yeah. That settled something in me I didn't even realize was still tense. I looked at him for a second, then shook my head slightly. You know this all started because of one message, right? I know. Nice shirt. He nodded. Worked, didn't it? I huffed out a quiet laugh. Barely. He leaned a little closer. Not pushing. Just enough. But you answered. There it was again. That same point he'd made from the beginning. And yeah, he was right. I did. I admitted. A pause. Then, I'm glad you did, he said. Simple. No hint. No edge. Just honest. That landed more than anything else. Because it wasn't about tension anymore. Or guessing. Or pushing. It was just real. I leaned back into the couch, letting out a slow breath. And for the first time since this whole thing started, my head was quiet. No overthinking. No second guessing. No trying to figure out what this meant. I just knew one thing. I didn't regret it. Not the messages. Not the tension. Not the way it kept building until it couldn't anymore. Not him. And yeah, that probably said everything I needed to know. Because it didn't start with something big. No dramatic moment. No clear beginning. Just a message. A hint. A choice I didn't even realize I was making at the time. And somehow, turned into this. Something real. Something I didn't plan. Something I stopped trying to avoid. And the craziest part? If he texted me the same way again, I'd still answer.